My original intention for publishing my first video on David Paulides and Missing 411 was just to highlight that people need to do their own research when it comes to anything. Going forward, though, I took the time to read some of Missing 411 Eastern United States, and I have to say that just making one video on the discrepancies in the book does not do this justice. As I move forward, I'm just astounded by the lack of care that these cases are given. I mean, I wasn't under the impression that every case would be laid out and documented just as well as Dennis Martin, but the majority of the cases in this book are only covered by a few short paragraphs. Elizabeth Ann Kant, for example, has a total of 5 sentences dedicated to her disappearance. And that's not even the least amount. Some of them only have 2, describing who they are in terms of their vital statistics, followed by they went missing and were never seen again. I know it sounds like I'm criticizing Mr. Paulides here, but I'm not. Their inclusion at all in a publication is more than some missing people ever get. You would think that being such short cases would mean that there wouldn't be much clarification needed, or perhaps there just isn't much information available to the public regarding those cases. But I wanted to be sure, so I kept going, and I'd like to share what I found. The first case we're looking at is Meryl Newcombe and George Weeden. These 2 men went missing together, so their cases are combined, and here are the facts. Meryl, 50, and George, 63, went missing on October 29th, 1959, from Meryl's own hunting lodge. They went hunting together and failed to return. George was injured in a train accident in 1941 that left him with chronic back and leg issues. They were hunting on a Crown Game Preserve. This is in Canada, by the way. The weather would have been cold and snowy. The second search was conducted in spring after the snow melted. And Mr. Paulides comments that 2 men going missing, quote, baffles my common sense approach to search and rescue, close quote. Which is interesting to me because, as far as I know, he is not traditionally trained in wilderness search and rescue. Please correct me in the comments if he has received these credentials and I'm just not aware of it. To share some context, George and Meryl went to the lodge on October 22nd, 1959. Their hunting trip was supposed to last a few days. They were seen by train operators and 2 trappers on October 23rd. When they failed to return to work on October 27th, 4 days after they were last seen, they were reported missing to the police. I think the additional days that they were missing makes the case a little less mysterious. It means that any number of things could have happened within that time frame. Mr. Paulides comments that since George was more or less disabled and had difficulty walking, that he was less likely to go missing since he would have opted to stay near a vehicle. I tend to take the opposite opinion. Since he was disabled, if they got lost or turned around, it would have made it very difficult for them to make any significant progress, to get back on track, or to find help. I don't know why he's so baffled by 2 elderly people going missing, since it's very likely that Meryl simply refused to leave George's side, or conversely, Meryl somehow got injured and George was unable to travel on his own. Again, this is all opinion, and the omitted facts aside, I think it's an interesting case, and I don't have anything against it being included in Missing 411. Up next is Elizabeth Ann Kant. As I stated in the intro, Elizabeth is one of the first cases and has a total of 5 sentences dedicated to her. That should make her information pretty easy to verify. I've extracted the facts and presented her short entry as seen here. Elizabeth, 45, went missing on October 16, 1972, in Adair Township, 73 miles east of Cochrane, Ontario. She was in a hunting party at the time. She got separated near Camp 23 at Abitibi, where the Abitibi River enters the lake, very close to Abitibi-des-Trois Provincial Park. A large and lengthy search for Elizabeth was conducted, but she was never found. And that's all we get in the Missing 411 book. But let's see what some internet sleuthing can find out. According to Porchlight Canada for the missing and unidentified, the vital statistics are correct as listed in Missing 411. The area where she went missing also correlates, but there are some issues surrounding this information. Camp 23 is not 73 miles east of Cochrane. It's about 33 miles southeast. I believe the implication is that the hunting party went east, circled around Lake Abitibi, and started heading back north towards Cochrane again, but that's just my interpretation of this statement. Open quote. Elizabeth Ann Kant has been missing since October 16, 1972. She has been with a hunting party in Adair Township, approximately 73 miles east of Cochrane, and was last seen about 2.4 miles south of Camp 23 Abitibi limits, close quote. That is, the hunting party went 73 miles east of Cochrane, and she stayed with them for a time before being last seen 2.4 miles south of Camp 23. Mr. Paulides makes two additional claims besides this about the area where Elizabeth went missing. One, that she was near Abitibi River. Two, Abitibi River empties into Abitibi Lake, which is very close to a national park. These statements are very misleading. There's a small river about 2.5 miles south of Camp 23 called Driftwood River, which connects to Black River, which then connects to Abitibi River. If you follow the rivers, the lake is approximately 37 miles from the place of disappearance. Even as a crow flies, the park's boundary lies approximately 29 miles from the place of disappearance. Are we to believe that every disappearance within a 30-mile radius of a national or provincial park is somehow tied to that park? All of this is moot, however, since the area was not made into a provincial park until 1985, 13 years after Elizabeth disappeared. I suppose that in addition to provincial and national parks being nefarious in some way, we also have to watch out for places that may become parks even decades down the line. I couldn't find any information about the search effort itself, but I think it's fair to say that this missing person's case is misrepresented in the Missing 411 book. Well, I can honestly say that I did not expect to find a discrepancy in just 5 sentences, which seem to appear as hard facts in the book. It appears as though it is necessary to fact-check Mr. Paulides even when he is presenting statements as the hard facts of the case. Let's continue. Up next is the case of Vachon. Vital has just 2 sentences concerning his disappearance, along with his statistics. Here are the stated claims. Vital, who was 56 at the time, went missing on May 1st, 1973, from Lucas Township near Timmins, Ontario. He was last seen as he departed a bush camp. The search of the bush camp and surrounding area didn't find any evidence of his whereabouts. Besides a profile on Porchlight Canada, I was only able to find a Facebook post which mentioned him by Tim Marzenko. He appears to be an author and promotes that Vital will have his own chapter in his next book. I'm not willing to speculate about his disappearance, so I won't give the posted theory here. It's in the sources to look up if you're so inclined. There seems to be little known about the man in general. So we'll move on. Next up is Foster Bezanson. There's a couple paragraphs on Foster, but most of it is concerning how desolate the area is and repeated information. For example, Mr. Paulides manages to say that Foster was armed in 3 different sentences in the same paragraph. Here's the condensed information. Foster, who was 64 at the time, went missing in October 25th, 1980, from Cochrane, Ontario. He was last seen leaving on a hunting trip, armed with a .30-06 on Translimit Road 4. When he failed to return home, a search was launched. Foster is actually part of the DOE Network, an international center for unidentified and missing persons. His case file is 1978DMON, and I'll link that in the sources. The profile there backs up what's in Missing 411. The same information is on Porchlight Canada, which I'm now convinced is Mr. Polides' primary source for these cases. Besides these two places, I can't find any more information that's easily available online. Next up is John Samuel Clifford. Even Mr. Polides notes it was difficult to get information on John's disappearance, so here's what he presents. John, who was 65 at the time, went missing on October 10th, 1987, near Frederick House, Ontario. That was very close to where Foster went missing. Well, Frederick House is 8 miles west of Cochrane, which seems to be a sort of main landmark for the area. What's funny to me is that we have, again, an instance of Mr. Polides demonstrating that his idea of close is pretty loose. John Samuel Clifford, also on the DOE Network and Porchlight Canada, went missing 10 miles to the north of Cochrane, while Foster went missing on his hunting trip to the east of Cochrane. If Translimit Road is the same as it was in the 80s, then that's over 25 miles away, headed in a completely different direction, and it took place 7 years prior. I'm not sure why Mr. Polides feels it necessary to try and draw a parallel here. Let's move on. Dustin Rhodes. Dustin, who was 64 at the time, went missing on July 6, 1991, from his cottage on Lake Gibson. Besides a description of it being a rural and wooded area, and it being about 5 miles to the south of a provincial park, that's all we get about Dustin. Gibson Lake is closer to 7 miles by air and 8.5 miles by road to the nearest provincial park, but that's a little nitpicky. Additional information I was able to find is that his truck was also found at his house, but that's not terribly useful. Again, I'm not sure why he's included in this list. Is it because he happened to live close to a park, or is it because of his age? You'll see what I mean here in a minute. Bernard Champagne. Bernard, who was 80 at the time, went missing on July 10th, 1997, from his cabin on the outskirts of Valcote. He lived in the rear building, and the owner of the main one kept close tabs on him, so he noticed when he went missing fairly quickly. The search included canines, helicopters, airplanes, and ground personnel. He was never found. This is a case I had to search a little harder for. To nitpick, the official Canada records have him listed as 79, not 80 when he went missing, but whatever. According to what I saw, he lived in a cabin with no running water or electricity behind someone else's residence. Bernard left his home sometime during the day and never returned home, so the owner of the other residence called for help. This is pretty much what's in the book. He was never located, though the area is wooded, so there's no mention of if he had any means of getting around via car, or if he had shared transportation. Again, I can't speculate too much here. I don't know why he's included in this case, since he was nowhere near a park, even by Mr. Polides' loose definition of close. In the book, there's an extra section not seen in many of these short entries called a case summary, but it's not a summary at all. It's just questions posed by Mr. Polides. Quote, "This is another case where readers need to take a breath and not be numb to these disappearances. Think clearly about how an elderly 80-year-old man could be in the bush of Manitoba. How is it possible that Mr. Champagne was not found? Why would Mr. Champagne ever want to be out in the bush? Even if the man was senile, how far could he really get when others are trying to keep track of him?" Close quote. Again, it's not mentioned by what means Bernard left his house, just that he did, and another resident appeared to at least be aware of this, which is why they became concerned when he didn't return by nightfall. This means he was potentially missing for an extended period of time already. I'm not calling this entry untrue, so much as odd to be included in Missing 411 at all, but let's move on. The last case listed for Central Ontario, again in a book called Missing 411 Eastern United States, is the case of Michael Joseph Linklater. Michael, who was 44 at the time, went missing on July 13th, 2003, from somewhere between Cochrane and Moosonee, Ontario. Michael was camping near mile marker 115 on the CN railroad line. Well, it turns out he actually went camping with his father and brother. When he went missing, his father and brother searched on their own for a few hours before calling for help. Besides that, the information matches up. Not much else to say here, besides I'm not sure why he did not include the fact that he was with his family at the time. Now we reach the chapter summary, which I've hinted at a couple times. It's only a couple of sentences of Mr. Paulides' speculation, so let's read it. Quote, "The age of people missing in Ontario is striking. They are consistently older than people missing in almost every other region in North America other than regions of the same provenance. Why aren't there consistencies in the age of the missing?" Close quote. In this chapter, David Paulides covered 10 missing people, 9 of which were actually talked about in the chapter. The average age of the persons listed was 59 years old. That is indeed on the older side. Then we look at the Doe network. We have 125 files open for males in Ontario. The average age of all of these people is 27. If we include the 71 females as well, the average age is 27 and a half. That doesn't seem unusually high to me, but let's compare it to somewhere else in North America with similar numbers. The average age for missing persons in the Doe network from Missouri is 36 for males. There's 124 open files. The average age for a missing female in Missouri is 28 of 120 open files. That totals to 32 years old when you combine them. I don't think I need to tell you that 32 is more than 27. But now maybe you think I'm the one cherry picking. I mean, I just named one other place. What about somewhere completely different from Missouri, like North Carolina? Well, the average age for a male in North Carolina that's missing is 36 and a half. Average age for a female is 30. Combined, you get about 33 and a half. Again, this is higher than the average for Ontario. That leaves me pretty confused as to why Mr. Paulides thinks it's accurate to represent the average age of 59 and comment on how high that is for North America, when the actual average pans out very differently. This is an excellent example of why Mr. Paulides is so commonly accused of cherry picking. It's not because he filters out cases which are deemed normal and only showing mysterious and unexplained. That'd be fine. Instead, what seems to be happening, in this instance anyway, is that he creates a very small sample of missing persons with a trend that he wants to highlight and presents that as representative of all cases. That is cherry picking, not filtering. Thank you for taking the time to watch my examination of the first chapter of Missing 411 Eastern United States, although we haven't actually seen any US cases so far. The next section of the book will change that. We'll get to look at cases from Pennsylvania, Ohio, and others while we look at missing berry pickers. Until then, take care.